Well, good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to our weekly Kaffeepause. Usually on Mondays, but because of the holiday and because of my travel schedule yesterday, we're on a Tuesday today, and I am particularly delighted to welcome Stefan Kornelius, the political editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung. As regular listeners know, we often have a Berlin-based journalist to talk about what's going on in German politics. But since the Munich Security Conference just took place in Munich, I could not think of a better person than Stefan Kornelius, the political editor at Süddeutsche, to join us today. Stefan, herzlich willkommen, and thank you for making the time to be with us.
Steve, always a pleasure. Good to see you again. We just met.
After 2 years of just seeing you on the screen, it was wonderful to see you in person on Saturday, and I'm happy, to see you again and to know that you physically exist. You're not just a picture anymore. So today is shaping up to be just an incredibly busy news day, and I had initially invited you to get your readout on the Munich Security Conference, which of course took place under the cloud of COVID and the increasing, the shadow of increasing tension with Russia over Ukraine. And while I'd like to ask you about the conference, I really think we have to start a conversation today with the news that Vladimir Putin has recognized the independence of two territories in eastern Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk, and he then ordered Russian troops into the area. These moves are seen as a sharp escalation of the conflict with Ukraine and could be a prelude to a broader invasion. The West, of course, is developing its response, but the big news today was that Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that Germany would halt certification of the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline. And after weeks of silence on Nord Stream 2, this is one of the strongest moves yet by the West to punish the Kremlin for recognizing the two separatist regions in Ukraine. Stefan, let's start by maybe talking a little bit about this shift in position from Olaf Scholz. It's a shift that has been desired, certainly by Washington and other allies for a while, but has not come until today.
Well, it was in the making for a long time, and we saw Scholz keeping that strategic ambiguity and not really telling what he wants to do. But preparations for the move had been on their way for a long time. Franziska Brandner, the state secretary in the economics ministry, and some of our listeners might know her, was the one in charge preparing for it. It has a lot to do with Germany's question on energy supply, energy security, a substitute for what the Russians were supposed to deliver. And now Scholz actually used an almost perfect moment. The news dwarfs compared to what we're getting in from Ukraine right now, from absorbing the speech Putin himself gave last night, which was just breathtaking, and I urge everyone to listen to it because it shows the nature of the beast. And so, yes, it is basically a perfect moment for a perfect decision.
And how are people responding to it in Germany?
I think everyone has anticipated it somehow, and quite honestly, over the past weeks, some kind of realization has sunken in that Nord Stream has given far too much weight recently in our sort of in our analytical part and what's going on here. Nord Stream had become a fetish. Why do I say that? For almost more than half a year, Russia has not delivered the gas it was usually supplying. Now, Russia is sticking to the long-term contracts, but we are talking of the short-term supply. That's what's usually happening. And the message was Gazprom is not acting as a market competitor anymore. They're not, if you have demand, if you want to buy it, they're not selling. So in the result, Germany's gas reserves have been extremely depleted. A lot of those gas reserves are actually being held by Gazprom. More than half of the German strategic gas reserves, or sort of the storage facilities within Germany, are owned by Gazprom. I mean, the market is totally deregulated, so they're entitled to do this. And those storages are empty at 4%. So what we're seeing is Russia is using gas as a weapon already. And it doesn't make a difference whether it doesn't supply gas via Nord Stream or via Shamal pipeline or via any other pipeline. It just doesn't supply it. So we all realize that the strategic importance we had given to Nord Stream is totally overrated. Russia can use its leverage via any means of transport. And so basically Nord Stream has outlived its service.
So in one quote that I saw from Olaf Scholz, he sort of justified the shift in position by saying that the situation today is fundamentally different from the situation that existed before, and that we have to reevaluate the situation, but also reevaluate Germany's energy needs and energy mix. Do you think that this will finally serve as a catalyst to spark a deeper debate about energy in Germany and energy dependence, interdependence?
Yeah, it's already a huge issue. And I mean, shifting the mix is the biggest task. Well, it's on the general political agenda of this government to get more into alternative energy sources, but you can't do that overnight. Shifting supply means buying from different sources. That's already happening. Germany has just about 2 weeks ago ordered major LNG supplies from Japan and Korea. There are tankers on the way now. The next problem comes with unloading them. Germany has ordered 4 rentable unloading docking stations, basically terminals, to dock outside German coastline and to help unloading that gas. But it's sort of small steps on a long path. The big task now will be, or the big question will be, will Russia stop delivering gas to Europe altogether as retaliation for the sanctions, which are about to be decided upon in an hour's time? And if that happens, then Europe has a problem. The estimate is that the need for gas will be feelable after 24 hours. So we basically have a very short timeline we're talking about. This is the vulnerability of Europe, not only of Germany. There are countries even more open to that pressure. Italy, for example, Austria, Central European countries, Bulgaria, for example. So we see a joint European issue here. The Commission is deeply involved, and there are serious attempts now to deflect that problem to very quickly buy alternative sources, but you really do not know whether this will succeed.
So one of our viewers asks whether Russia can stop its gas deliveries to Europe without cutting off Kaliningrad.
Good question. I think Kaliningrad can be supplied differently, and I'm not sure whether it is needed. The Shamal pipeline, I think it passes Kaliningrad, is already empty, so that would give proof to me. But I'm not an expert in that detail. I apologize. The question is, would Europe retaliate by, let's say, blockading Kaliningrad? I think it would not be a very wise move to do. Putin is right now shying away from threatening EU-Europe, the Baltics and Poland and sort of the newly members of NATO and the EU. So we should leave it at that. I think there is enough trouble now with Ukraine. His speech last night pointed out to his big desire to rewrite history. It is a major sort of goal he has drafted there. And he starts with the assumption that Ukraine is not a proper state and should be part of Russia. And this is outrageous enough. And historically not correct, but nevertheless, it gives us enough of a problem to chew on. So let's don't broaden the issue.
So related to that, one of the things that was talked about at the conference was how to have sort of a proportional response to whatever Putin does. It seemed to me that at the conference there was an awful lot of hand-wringing about what Putin might do, when he might do it, as well as what the Western response would look like. And the main question that remained unanswered, for me at least, was what sort of action by Putin will trigger what sort of proportional response by the West. You had a big interview in the Süddeutsche Zeitung yesterday with Secretary of State Tony Blinken. One of the questions that you asked him was what happens the day after Russian troops enter Ukraine. And so I'd love to hear from you about what he and others had to say about a proportional response to Russian acts of aggression and what you expect next based on what Putin has done so far.
Yeah, well, proportionality is a long issue. It's a very extensively debated over the past weeks, and to my opinion, that's sort of now my analysis of what I get from all those conversations. It is mostly designed. This entire debate is designed at giving ourselves some kind of peace with what we are doing. It doesn't really impact neither the proceedings in Ukraine nor Russia's action. I think we're beyond the point where our sanctions will really change Putin's behavior. He has doubted himself. He has really cut himself off that kind of logic. Nevertheless, our political side needs to justify its steps, not only opposite a very critical public, but also parliaments. It has to be legally sound. It has to be proved. And we need to sort of make it watertight also for actions which we might follow suit. Now, the EU and the US have been extremely coordinated, and that's the big message I took away from Munich, in preparing this. And it's not just a matter of the past weeks, it's actually something which goes on since October. If you look at sort of the first signs of when would that all happen, we saw Putin's speech in September, what we all refer to as sort of the initial status, but we even have proof that, for example, Gazprom started not to fill up the tanks last summer in August and July, that Angela Merkel and President Macron were suggesting last July, very sort of surprisingly to all of us, to have Putin participate in the EU summit. We are all wondering, why is she doing this? Probably we know now. She knew more than we knew at that time, and she wanted to preempt his sort of accusation that we are shutting him out. Now, back to the sanctions and proportionality. What does it mean? The debate right now, and EU foreign ministers are sitting and talking as we speak, is should we shoot all our bullets right now, or keep some for later? And the answer is let's do that in steps. The US administration last night basically preempted the decision by saying, well, they have tailor-made sanctions for that case. And we saw them being published by the White House even in the night. They're rather minor. I think the European ones will be much heavier, and Nordstrom is probably the biggest token we are seeing in this. But also designed at members of parliament, the entities which have been recognized now, and other things. The escalation comes with sort of the next step. If Putin really brings in troops into what's left of Ukraine, then we see broader sanctions against all the technological sector, oil and gas exploration, airline industry, telecommunication, finance. That's a big issue. There will be just 2-3 banks left open for the necessary transfers of payment for gas. But in that case, the European side does expect Russia to retaliate in full and stop gas flows. We will never know. They will not announce it. We will know it, but it would not arrive anymore. And so we are all watching the gas meters right now. There's all online, and you can watch it, how much gas comes in, and probably will run dry in 2-3 days' time.
So related to gas prices and some of the challenges that we face, one of our viewers writes, some European countries like Italy are already rolling out fiscal measures to try to shield consumers and companies from rising gas prices. Is Germany thinking about any such subsidies or tax cuts in the near term, given how high German inflation already is and how high electricity prices are in Germany?
Yes, there is some thinking in that respect. There's already a decision to subsidize subsidized living. I mean, social livings or conditions where people are being basically given shelter by the state, so they would get additional money to pay for their heating. But the big chunk is definitely the industry. I mean, that's what's eating most of the gas, and what's happening to those energy-hungry companies in Germany, which are not able to sustain their production lines if it goes that way. Things are ready, they're prepared, and we do see on the Nordstrom decision that there has been some preparation has been made. The Nordstrom decision, for example, needs some vast legal work to actually make that sort of happen in our system, and the same goes for the question if subsidies need to be paid. I had a chance to talk to Ursula von der Leyen at the Munich conference, and she already lined out that all that preparatory work is being done on the EU. It needs to be aligned with European competition laws and has to be done jointly. So yes, it is all prepared. It's a big effort to keep the whole European lawmaking and political machinery in line, because fear is that the whole sanction package might falter, might collapse the moment one of the members will veto it. You need unanimity for it, and fear is that you will find the one which boycotts it. That could be Hungary, the most likely candidate. Less likely Italy, even less likely the Dutch. They have been extremely firm, even in the sort of last remarks you saw coming in from Draghi or Rutte. So Hungary is the place to watch, the country to watch. But I think Viktor Orban knows that he hasn't that many shots left versus the EU.
So you anticipated one of our viewers' questions, who was asking about whether or not there would be unanimity among EU member states on sanctions, and it sounds like you think Europe will hold together, but that there are a couple of countries that we really have to watch to see how they actually respond.
Correct. One interesting observation: there hasn't been a special summit of the EU heads of state and government on the Ukraine crisis until last Friday, and the one which took place was sort of a virtual one on video for just a brief hour. The Commission desperately wanted to avoid the situation that heads of states come in the same room and start debating sanctions, because usually this ends with some orders given to the Commission to negotiate that thing, like in public arena, and like a trade contract, and that never leads to anywhere good. So the Commission secretly, or at least discreetly, prepared these sanctions very jointly with the United States. The sort of the biggest impact would definitely be export controls, actually a sanction tool which the European Union never has applied in that width as we will see it now. By the way, a very interesting signal also versus the Chinese. In all the competition cases we do have, especially with Estonia now and with Lithuania, I mean, the challenges China poses in driving the EU apart. And the tactics or strategy is to actually bring in a special council meeting as soon as possible to vote on it. So probably Brussels, the Commission is now waiting for the next 24, 48 hours, call on a meeting, and then have it decided upon very quickly, and avoiding an extended debate about it. There has to be also a shock and awe moment on the political side within Europe.
Mm-hmm. So I found it interesting earlier in our conversation, though, you said that even though sanctions is one of the leverages that the West has, that you don't think that sanctions will necessarily change Putin's behavior. And this sort of dovetails with something that I heard from a Ukrainian in exile who I met at the conference, who's now a journalist with Deutsche Welle. And he actually said that Putin and the Russian oligarchs are all prepared to give up their wealth and assets outside of Russia, to pull back, and for a very hard and difficult process ahead. That there's a tremendous amount of loyalty to Putin, and that he believed that if the West releases heavy sanctions, it wouldn't have any effect on Putin at all. But he also went so far as to say that he thinks the West has made a big mistake in looking at the current crisis as a new crisis and not as part of a long planned process and sort of strategic undertaking by Putin that has had a number of different elements, whether it be some of the cyber attacks that have occurred over the recent years, some of the murders that have taken place over the recent years. He said that he thought that the Western nations had made a mistake not looking at these as a collective, but rather looking at them as isolated incidents and sort of saying, it's not a big deal, it's just one thing. Of course, we're concerned. But he said, now as we take a step back and as this crisis really unfolds, this has been something that Putin has been planning for a very long time. What are your thoughts on that? Has our sort of view of Russia the last few years been wrong?
Well, I fully agree. It needed that speech last night to come to an assessment which is totally in line with the Ukrainian colleague basically said that we were all hanging on to a wrong idea of Putin's ability to act rational. But the speech basically outlined the extent of his worldview, of his demands, of his grievance with the West, of his historical understanding of what's happening. I mean, it was a kind of an explosion of madness. I mean, I apologize for my words, but this has nothing to do with the kind of rationality we are putting behind in any kind of negotiating situation with the Russians. So this is the base we are talking about. There is nothing to talk about. So the question is, where does that lead us? What would sanction actually achieve? Yes, Russia is buffered. Russia is prepared. The reserves are high. The country seems to be prepared to withdraw from the scene. But then those sanctions we do decide upon also serve the effect to cut us off from Russia. Mm-hmm. So it has a double function working both ways. It's a process of understanding Russia in the West as well, especially in Germany, where there's still a lot of understanding for what Russia does, and there's a lot of soul searching where our mistakes were. I think this moment now gives us clarity, and clarity especially in the way that at least with Vladimir Putin's Russia, I don't see that much common ground to build whatever joint interest on. And that's exactly the problem. We're in the moment of disentangling from Russia. This is a very, very severe, almost historic moment. We're cutting off ties, and we might really deplore this. This is not nice. This is not wise. This is extremely costly. But then again, we also have to shield us from the effect of Russia's policy, and that policy is to drive us apart, to dictate a new order, a new European order, and to sow that seed of undemocratic, illiberal, and authoritarian mix back in our societies, which actually led to disaster in Europe before. So we don't want to have anything to do with this. My guess is we'll see that cutting off moment now, and we'll see a lot of bad debates, big debates, especially here in Germany, on on whether this is wise or not, and whether it's our own fault or not. I would, but in the end, hope that leads to some clarity, which we badly needed. There will be life with Russia at some point again. But for the moment, it's getting really tough to imagine how that should look like. So it needs time. It needs time to cool off. And we cannot change the internal Russian situation. It's not our desire to foster regime change or whatever. It's not in our hands anyway. but we can shield ourselves from Russia's influence.
Do you think that the German public is prepared for this change, though? You know, the as we've talked about, as you said, the leveling of these sanctions against Russia will have an impact on the West as well. And we haven't even talked about what sort of possible Russian retaliation there might be for those sanctions. I think many expect, you know, more cyber attacks and more sort of picks and jabs to try to keep the uncertainty in the West and everybody a little bit off kilter and off balance. But is the German public prepared for what happens next?
Not really, I think. What we're seeing domestically in Germany is the country being mostly taken, well, not by surprise, but probably not really having thought all of this through. And this has a lot to do with what happened over the past 16 years. I mean, that world never has been without crises over these years. But Germany was lucky enough to be shielded from those crises, probably thanks to the policies of her chancellor, thanks to other circumstances, its economic strength. So all the major disruptions we saw over this long time has never really hit Germany. And Merkel, in all what she did well, especially in her workings towards the world, shielded the German public from all these unpleasantries. Germany was really never forced to, at least mentally or intellectually, engage in those world problems, never asked the tough questions. There were a couple of interesting debates where we talked about it. I remind everyone of Thomas Spacker's famous article in Political Quarter.
Yeah.
3 years ago, and I guess most of our viewers will know what I'm talking about. The foreign policy advisor of President Steinmeier, who basically brought out those German contradictions to the open and said, well, there are so many lies here, so many things which haven't been unanswered. And if you look at Annalena Baerbock, for example, at the Munich conference of this weekend, when she was giving that speech, she was extremely sort of moral and lofty in her demands. And you always wonder, okay, if things can't stay like that, what do you concretely suggest that we change? What is it? Where is German leverage? Where's the beef? And that's a question I guess the public here has to get used to.
That's actually a great segue to where I wanted to go next, because in addition to the interview with Secretary Blinken, you had another piece in the paper entitled Power and Fairy Tales about the conference and about the news as it was developing. And I wanted to ask you, sort of taking a step back from the current crisis and the latest iteration of the current crisis, what were your takeaways from the Munich Security Conference? I certainly felt that transatlantic unity was on display, that the West was holding together in the face of this current crisis. And there were a few individuals who I thought were impressive. I thought that Annalena Baerbock's speech from the main stage was excellent. And I'm just curious what sort of you heard both from the stage, but also in your conversations on the periphery, and what your sort of high level thoughts were on the current state of the transatlantic relationship.
Well, it was a conference which was basically a transatlantic one. There was no Russian person. There was, at least not in large numbers, no Chinese, no, I mean, very few others. It was basically a transatlantic affair thing, which in the end wasn't bad. It was about high time to reassure ourselves on what we want and what we can actually do. My sort of observation is that on sort of what we want, the German side is extremely outspoken, but they are a bit helpless on the question on how to achieve it. What concretely to do to get Putin not. I mean, what I always see with Baerbock and also the other members of the new coalition is kind of demand-driven policies. It's a different level of arguments. It's always very abstract. It's never getting concrete. Whereas from the American side and also certainly the British and others, it's far more to the point, operationally driven. And we are coming to a moment where we have to answer operational questions. And as we speak, as I said, they will decide on operational issues. Yes, Baerbock's effect is quite huge. This is something new for German foreign policy. Yes, she's the first woman foreign minister. She is female foreign minister. She's emotionally very strong. So she gives you this impression that she is really touched by what she says. Sometimes she's becoming sort of over the top. Listening to her now more often, I wonder when she stops sort of just demanding, but also suggesting action. Mm-hmm. Surprise to me was Boris Johnson, who came up on the stage just without pre-notice. Basically, he called the conference organizers 3 days before and said, "Oh, listen, I want to give a speech," and so they accommodated him. And he basically made a sort of a little imitation of Winston Churchill, as we all know, so blood, sweat, and tear speech. Kamala Harris, U.S. U.S. Vice President, she's a darling in Germany. Everyone loves her. When she crossed the streets in front of Bayerischer Hof, those onlookers were cheering at her and just happy to see her. So that's probably something new for her, at least in the broader American context. But nevertheless, she never appeared to the audience here, at least, as one who's dealing that much with the big geopolitical issues. Now she did for the first time. She gave a speech which was well written. She delivered it extremely tough and extremely to the point. But in the end, it looked a bit sort of mechanical or sort of cold. But in combination of her job, of her office, the office she holds, and the words, she did the right thing. So in the end, yes, the biggest impact had the Ukrainian delegation, those who basically came from the front line and made you feel that their life is on the line. I mean, Zelensky standing there, and well, he flies back the same night. Will they shoot him down? Will he survive next week when they shell Kiev? Will they take him? You've really felt there's something on the line here.
So let me ask you one more question, and it really has to do with German domestic politics in light of this crisis, and it's been sort of instigated by one of our viewers. You were talking about Annalena Baerbock and perhaps the hope that she will turn words and her passion into more action and actually make more policy recommendations. At the same time, as we discussed at the beginning of our conversation today, we've seen Olaf Scholz, who's gone from not even saying words to taking action, and that there has been some real sort of tangible movement there. So I guess, obviously this current situation is an incredible stress test and would be an incredible stress test for any new government, but it's particularly a stress test for the three-party German coalition, which is new. Do you think that the coalition will be able to hold together on its Russia policy?
Well, those in office, the ones in cabinet, definitely yes. The leadership level is unified in what they do and what they say, so I don't see any kind of problem. The problem or the test comes with the second rank there, those members of parliament, basically the party base, the party conference goers, those who are the ranks and files. And Olaf Scholz's next test at an SPD party conference will be in 2 years' time, so he can definitely hold out for a while. Mm-hmm. I don't see that much opposition in Parliament Party coming up right now. And quite honestly, from what happened last night, it would give me much surprise if somebody could take that as a pretext to challenge the government in its action. It hasn't really amassed to any critical moment here. So right now, no way that this coalition is engaged.
Well, Stefan, it is always great to talk with you, and I am deeply appreciative of your taking this time to meet with us today, particularly given how busy things are. And I hope that we can continue the conversation and that we can see each other again in the not too distant future. But for now, herzlichen Dank. Great to see you. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching. And your phone is ringing, my phone is ringing constantly. So let's turn to those.
It is a crazy time for all of us. Well, take
Okay.
care and stay healthy.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.